Thank you for those awesome jams, Lonnie. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Project Connect South Shore Working Group. So for anyone who is interested or knows someone who is interested in listening to this meeting in Spanish, please feel free to click on the interpretation button at the bottom of the screen and select Spanish. I will now take a moment to offer a brief welcome along with these same instructions in Spanish. Buenas noches, gracias por estar con nosotros en el taller comunitario acerca del South Shore. Si está participando en español, es posible que actualmente ya esté escuchando la interpretación en vivo. Si no es así y desea escuchar a esta reunión en español, solo hay que buscar el botón Interpretación en la parte inferior de la pantalla. Oprime el botón y seleccione la opción de español. Más adelante en el programa tendremos la oportunidad de aportar comentarios en vivo. Si desea participar en español, los intérpretes estarán para apoyarle. Quedamos a la orden. Y con su permiso, continuaremos con la reunión en inglés con interpretación al español. Thank you. Let's transition to our slideshow for tonight. So tonight we will begin with a brief overview of Project Connect, and then we will discuss what we have studied and what we are proposing for the South Shore portion of the Blue Line. The station locations that we will be studying include Waterfront, Travis Heights, and Lakeshore. If you are watching us on the Zoom webinar, we will have the Q&A tab open during this meeting. If you are watching us on Cap Metro's social media channels, please feel free to type your questions into the comments as we have a team of people who are working behind the scenes to get all of your questions answered. At the end of our presentation, there will be an opportunity for you to raise hands and take turns speaking in a live radio show type format. We will close with some additional information on how to stay engaged, and our aim is to wrap up and get you back to your evening plans by 7 p.m. So please allow me a moment to emphasize the following. Our outreach and engagement with the community has been intentionally inclusive. We want to hear from all voices in our community. So if you spot a person who may be a friend or a neighbor that you encourage to participate for the first time tonight, please encourage new voices to be heard in this space. This is a safe space where every idea deserves to be considered and every question deserves to be answered. That said, we will try to get to all of your questions tonight, but if we can't, know that we will use the issues you have raised to inform topics for our future meetings. Next slide, please. If this is your working group, welcome back. Thank you for joining us. If this is your first experience in a meeting with us, and you'd like to be more intimately involved with the details on a particular area within the Blue Line, or the orange line, such as South Shore here on the Blue Line, it's not too late to join a working group. If this sounds interesting to you, please visit projectconnect.com/get involved to find out more. Next slide, please. So let's begin with introductions. I'll ask my colleagues to please turn on their cameras and as I wave and as I call out your names to wave to our audience. I'll begin with my colleague, Lindsay Wood, who is the Deputy Project Manager for the Blue Line with HNTV. Hi, Lindsay.
Hi, Jocelyn.
And then we have Lonnie Stern, who is Austin Transit Partnerships Manager of Community and Business Partnerships. Hey, Lonnie. Thank you both for being here. So let's move on to a brief overview of Project Connect and the Blue Line. What is Project Connect? So it's no secret that Austin is the place to be. In fact, the population of the greater Austin area is expected to double from 2 million, which is the number that we captured in 2019, to 4 million in 2040. So what does that do to our roads? The bottom line is, if you think traffic is bad now, just wait. Next slide, please. In 2019, Council approved the Austin Strategic Mobility Plan, which aims to keep the numbers of cars constant while growing our population by an additional 2 million people. Our study from 2019 showed that at that time, pre-pandemic, only 24% of people were walking, biking, carpooling, teleworking, or taking public transportation to work. This study showed that 74% of people were driving to work alone. Through this plan approved by the Austin City Council, the goal is to grow with the city. As our population grows, we should have enough transportation options in place that by 2039, we have 50% of people choosing a different transportation mode. And yes, being realistic in this plan, we would still plan for about 50% of the Austin population to drive to work. But the transportation modes we put into place to support would be sufficient to alleviate traffic and keep our city moving. Slide, please. So Project Connect is a plan that was approved by voters in November of 2020, which expands transit throughout the Austin area. It does this by increasing services across the city, including a new light rail system, a downtown light rail tunnel that makes everyone's trip faster, an expanded bus system with Metro Rapid, Metro Express, and pickup zones. And we're also transitioning to a zero emissions or an all electric fleet in our buses as well as our trains. Slide 10, please. So what does this mean when we're talking about expanding transit? Do we expect that 100% of the people will ride buses and trains 100% of the time? No. But every time we take a car, especially a single rider car, off of the road, everyone benefits. So take a look at the left side of this image, the sample intersection, the orange and yellow section of this movement. Here you can see a lot more cars that are on the roadway, limited buses, and no dedicated transit lane. Here we are able to move 126 people through the roadway during each light cycle, with 80 of them in transit. On the right, or the blue-green side, we see fewer cars and a couple more buses and a lane that is dedicated to transit. In the same light cycle, we can move 235 people through this light cycle, with 204 of them in transit. That's more than 100 people getting through the intersection in the same light cycle. So more about Project Connect. Next slide, please. Project Connect is designed to reflect our community values, such as opportunity and equity. Project Connect will help create thousands of good local jobs and provide more access to healthcare, education, employment, essential services, entertainment, and will also create and maintain more affordable places to live. Environment and sustainability. There is a shared passion in our community for the environment. That's why a commitment to the environment and sustainable practices are core to Project Connect. We are already working towards a zero emission fleet I mentioned, and will continue to lean into the challenge to conserve and protect natural resources in the decisions that we make. And finally, innovation and technology. Technology and innovation inspire much of who we are as a region. Project Connect will embrace that spirit, making transportation smarter, more efficient, enjoyable, and easier to use. Slide 12. So where are we in this process? We've completed 15% design, that's 15% design. And we plan to release 30% design this summer with a draft of our environmental impact statement. By winter of 2022-23, we hope to have a record of decision issued by the Federal Transit Administration so that we can continue to design and build. For an overview of program cost considerations, we'll have a look at the next slide. I'm going to pause just a moment to give our interpreters some time to catch up a little bit. You can take this slide in. So something that's been in the media and in a lot of our community meetings is this program is going to cost a lot, and it's projected to cost more. Here are some facts that we can we can share with you tonight. So the original cost estimates were based on 5% design and a study of peer transit systems. Since then, since we did that study, things have increased in prices. That's no secret to any of us here. Some of them have increased by 70 or 80%. And the following three things are driving that cost increase. The first one is real estate in Austin and the price it's going to cost us in order to expand our right-of-way. The second one is inflation, and that's affecting all of us, but especially when it comes to labor and the supply chain. And the third one is program scope changes. As a result of the community impact, whether it's individual or collective through group meetings, we've been trying to change technical requirements. The tunnel length, for example, increased from 1.5 to 4 miles. So as a result, project phasing is going to be necessary for us to implement the program piece by piece within the available funding resources. And 30% cost estimates will be released this summer, and we could expect even additional cost increases. Know that a broad community conversation about costs and program phasing will be initiated at that time when we release the 30% this summer, and your community input will be essential to defining the next steps. There's one commitment to you. We commit that taxes will not be increased to implement the program. So while it could increase our length of time in which we construct the program, we will not increase taxes. With that, I'd like to turn things over to my colleague, Lindsay Wood, in order to explain more about the Blue Line. Lindsay, take it away.
Thank you, Jocelyn, and thank you all for joining us this evening. I'm going to dive into the Blue Line in the South Shore Working Group segment of the corridor. And first we have here the overview of the line. So the Blue Line runs from downtown at Republic Square, where the connection to the Orange Line would occur underground, in the subway below ground under downtown to Lady Bird Lake, where we will cross on a new bridge over Lady Bird Lake, to the south shore of Lady Bird Lake, where we continue street level or at grade, center running toward the airport. We have a total of 10 stations with along the dedicated transitway, and also share portions of the Metro Bus Route 20 along the route. Next slide. And I mentioned we're focusing on the South Shore Working Group area tonight, which is that portion from Lady Bird Lake over to the Lakeshore Station. So we're going to cover the Waterfront Station, the Travis Heights Station, and the Lakeshore Station. And the portion along East Riverside, going from Lady Bird Lake to just east of I-35. Next slide. And here are those 3 stations I mentioned, where each of these are at grade stations, and we'll talk a little bit more about each one as we dive into each of those areas. Next slide. And this is what I'm about to walk you through. So I want to give you a little bit of a legend of what you're about to see. In the design files that I'll show, you see here the different color codes, and the orange are the bicycle and pedestrian elements, or those things that are behind the curb. So sidewalks, bikeways, shared use path. In gray with the light blue outline are the roadway elements. So the lanes, in this case, along East Riverside Drive. In the dark blue dashed line that you'll see along the outside edge of the project is the proposed right-of-way footprint. And in green are the curb lines. You'll also see in the middle there the actual transitway itself for the light rail, with the eastbound or going toward the airport in the dark blue, and the westbound or coming toward downtown in dark red. Next slide.
And don't worry, folks, I have a little bit of color blindness, so I will definitely be asking for clarification as we go through these lines. And we'll try to also bring some of your questions into the walkthrough. So if, as you're watching this with us, you have questions, please go ahead and put them into the Q&A. We have a whole team that are ready to publish your answers, but also I may be able to ask them live as we're going through. And again, afterwards, we'll have an opportunity for folks to raise hands to ask questions live. But during this portion, we'll be using the Q&A. For those of you who are watching on social media, you can put questions into the chat there, and they will be brought into the conversation in the Q&A in here.
Thanks, Lonnie. And before I jump into the design files, I want to note that what I'm going to be showing you are live action design files. So these are works in progress. They are draft. We are changing things as we speak, as we find issues and work to resolve them. So your feedback and input is really helpful in this stage. And want to emphasize the fact that these are not final designs. These are working drafts. And with that, I will jump in.
All right, so now we're going to get to see the live computer-assisted drawing file. So it may take a sec or two to load up.
Lonnie, tell me when we're good, when you can see.
I can see this pretty well. I just need some context. Like, what am I looking at?
Okay.
It looks like a parking lot with lines on top.
Let me zoom out first before we go into the details. So we're going to cover, as I mentioned, the South Shore Working Group area, starting in the Waterfront Station area. So I'll zoom out a little bit first. And here we have Lady Bird Lake on the right, or sort of the top of the screen. And as I mentioned, the blue line will be coming over Lady Bird Lake on a new bridge. And that is where I will start. And as information for those of you particularly interested in the bridge itself, there was a recent meeting last month. I believe it was April 26th, I think. But you can go on the Project Connect website and see a full recording of that meeting and see lots of great visuals and different options for that bridge. So if you're interested in the portion of the project north of what I'm talking about tonight, there is a lot of really good information there. All right, so coming off of that bridge here, we are going to come down on a retaining wall, and I'm going to zoom really far in here just to remind everyone of what they're looking at in case you've already forgotten the legend. So coming in here, the two tracks are these red and blue lines in the middle of the transit way. The green is the curb, so that's the edge of our transit way. And then there are these lighter red lines on the outside. In that case, these are our retaining walls. So we're coming off of the bridge and coming down to approach ground level on these retaining walls that end right here, which, if you're familiar with this area, is right just north of where the driveway to the SoCo apartments are. So we're now the transit way fully back down to street level and approaching the Waterfront Station here.
And I just wanted to ask, before you move forward, there's some blue dotted lines. It looks like there's some white lines. Are any of these the right of way?
The dashed blue lines on the outside are the proposed right of way footprint through here.
Okay. Great.
The white lines, it kind of depends on which ones you mean. These ones here are the station platforms.
Great.
So in this area, these are a split or side platforms, meaning that if you're going to downtown, you need to be on this side of the tracks and you board or alight or get off of the train from this platform. And if you're going toward the airport, you're on the other side, on this platform over here. You also see the start of those orange shaded areas that I showed you earlier in the legend, and those are sidewalks through here. Something else to note in this area are that we have, so where this is located, the transit way is actually in what is today a private access easement that provides a roadway that comes from Riverside Drive down here to provide access to these apartments, to what used to be the Statesman site. And we are going to take the place of where that roadway is now, and so are replacing that. So that private access and that easement that we're now taking the place of with the transit way would be replaced on just the west side of the station and transitway. So providing that access roadway running north-south parallel to the transitway here. And that is expected to connect to the anticipated future Barton Springs Road extension that would run along sort of the south side of the Statesman site. That is a planned project by others, but that the blue line can connect to here.
Well, it's nice to know you're taking into account South Central Waterfront and how that'll change a road network then. I do see some other white lines, that hatch box there. I'm just gonna go ahead and assume that's Tom's Market, which is there today.
Yes, so those cross-hatched or kind of diamond crosses down there are impacted structures, and yes, that is Tom's Market. So because of the transitway being where I noted we need to replace that roadway access, that would go through that property. So we're here, I mentioned street level, so this is all at grade. You can step right off of the platform seamlessly to connect to the sidewalks next to it. In this case, they would be at the same level. So fully level boarding, fully accessible through here. And then the transitway continues south of the station and turns east along East Riverside Drive.
I think a question that we're going to have in this area, in particular, if you can zoom in a little at that intersection,
Yes.
you know, how many lanes of traffic are still able to go through? Because there are some people who, again, just like we said, they're still going to need to drive in this section of the road. So it looks like we've got 2 lanes in each direction and the turn lane over to the businesses that are there on the south side of the street.
Yeah, it's actually a U-turn lane. So in general, we are carrying forward 2 through lanes in each direction. So 2 eastbound lanes and 2 westbound lanes along eastbound Riverside or East Riverside Drive. And here we have this additional turn lane that is meant to help these properties and those that are needing to go back east between this segment from the Waterfront Station to Travis Heights. And the reason that's important is because with us introducing the transitway in the middle of the street here, you can't turn left across the transitway except at a signalized intersection where that turning movement is protected. And so this left turn lane that you mentioned there allows for U-turns. So what that means, I'm going to zoom out for a minute, is that let's say you're coming out of one of these areas along the north side of East Riverside, and you want to go back to I-35 or really anywhere to the east. You can't make a left turn out of that property because it's not a safely protected movement. And so what you would do is make a right turn in what is called right in, right out access into all of these areas. And you would make a right turn to come to this U-turn lane, and at this signalized intersection would have that protected movement to come back and go east.
And, you know, I'm seeing a question here in the chat. I'd like to know, can you point out where the bike lanes are in this area?
Yes. So in this area, it's very constrained. In areas east of I-35, we try to have separate sidewalks and bike lanes wherever possible that are behind the curb and separated from the roadway traffic. But in this area, that would have resulted in numerous property impacts, structure impacts, and displacements. So what you're seeing here in these orange shaded areas are shared use paths. So we are generally a roughly 10-foot shared use path in this area on both sides of the roadway that provide for bicycle and pedestrian access along the corridor. You also see this dark blue box here. That is a bus stop. So for those that might be wondering, we are not replacing bus service, or we are not discontinuing bus service along the corridor. They are complementary and work together with each other. And in each place that you see these blue rectangles are where we plan to have bus stops along the corridor.
Well, Lindsay, this is helpful. I know we've been doing a lot of explanation of like, what do we see here? So now we're going to be experts as we move east. But one thing that would be helpful to point out is when or if the shared use path kind of separates into shared bike and pedestrian facilities, if that happens, so that way we notice it as we're moving along the corridor.
Okay, I'll try to point that out once we're east of I-35, and there's a few examples of that. So going through here, I'm just going to move along, and Lonnie, stop me anytime. We're going through, we're at the watermark here. We keep those 2 through lanes in each direction. Transit way stays in the middle, shared use paths on either side.
And this really is an example of why you'd want a shared use path, because if you had the both separated, you might have to take a bite out of the watermark, and that's a lot of homes.
Yep.
So that makes
That
sense.
is one of our pinch points right there, that you can see how close we are in the driveway. We don't have a lot of room to work with. And you might also notice these kind of green dotted areas. Those are between the curb and the shared use path. Those are what we call tree and furniture zones, but basically a place for us to provide for street trees to provide for shade along the corridor.
Yeah, maybe scooters will wind up there instead of on the walkway, right?
And this is our first crossing. I mentioned that vehicles can't cross the transit way except at protected signalized intersections. Well, the same thing is true of pedestrians. We only want them crossing where it is safe and protected for them to do so. And so what you see here is a proposed pedestrian hybrid beacon, or PHB. And that's a new crossing here just to the west of Nooning to allow pedestrians and cyclists to get from one side to the other with a protected signal.
Yeah, I know a lot of people who walk through this area pretty much go through Alta Vista because of the creek system, but it sounds like Nooning, which is also a center street for Travis Heights, now has this new crossing connection. So that's an improvement. It's great.
And if you're wondering what some of these areas that kind of bump out along the corridor, they're a little different in each location. Here happens to be, this is for a drainage feature. So because we're widening the footprint of the corridor, it means that in some cases we have to extend the culverts in order to provide adequate drainage through here. So that's all that is a little bit of a bump out of right of way around a culvert head wall extension. And then we come into the Riverwalk Condo area, and this was the tightest point along the corridor where we just simply couldn't fit everything we wanted to fit. And we looked at lots of options and worked with the residents here, as well as with the city transportation department and several stakeholders to find the right answer here. And the original 15% design actually had a wider footprint, and it would have resulted in the displacement of 20 residential units, or really these front 2 buildings that you see here, in order to fit the basic requirements for that 10-foot shared use path I mentioned on both sides, plus the roadway lanes and the transit way. And we worked with all of those partners I mentioned to find a way to avoid or eliminate those displacements. It does mean that we are in a very constrained section here. We keep the shared use path on the south side or the eastbound side, but we've come down to a sidewalk only on the north side. And we've reduced everything to its sort of minimum space footprint in order to not displace any of these residents through here.
I appreciate that, especially given that the boardwalk is so close by.
That's right. I'm almost there. So we continue going east.
Yeah, so what is this yellow line? I've seen several comments about this yellow line in the chat.
That yellow line is nothing permanent. It is what we call a temporary construction easement. It's basically allowing for access or permission to access to build the system. So for access during construction is what that is. But there's no permanent footprint or impact within that area of the yellow line. The blue line is the outside limit of the permanent footprint.
See what you mean. You know, there are construction sites downtown, even currently, where suddenly the sidewalk disappears. And you think, like, really? We couldn't have a little space on the side during construction? So I'm glad to know that that'll still be available. And then I see TPSS located there.
Yes.
I know TPSSs are those power stations. And so are they labeled like this throughout, or do they look different?
So TPSS stands for Traction Power Substation. And what that is it delivers the power to the electrically powered light rail vehicles. So if you've ever seen light rail vehicles that have the overhead contact system or the catenary wires that run above them, and they have a piece of equipment that connects from the vehicle to those wires. And these traction power substations are what deliver the power to those wires ultimately to get to the vehicles. And that requires a footprint to accommodate those elements for the substation, for equipment needed for Austin Energy to get the power to the substation, and various other systems elements that are required to operate that. So we are provisioning for those potential elements, but also there is a parallel evaluation and consideration of how vehicles may be able to operate off wire for segments of the corridor. So you may not need all of these, but not having a vehicle selected at this point, we're provisioning for them to be safe. And then they may be able to be reduced in footprint and in quantity as we go forward and understand more about the specific vehicle capabilities that'll be in operation here.
I appreciate knowing that. And I guess for those who are watching all of these, the plans keep changing. So you never know what's going to happen to these TPSSs. But also as an aside, I would say, we've reached out to all of the property owners that have any sort of site impacts at this point. But if you're watching and this is the first time you're hearing of it, or if you happen to know a property owner in this area, please consider this one of the ways in which we're reaching out. We'd love to hear from you, and you are also welcome to share contact information. If you let us know in the Q&A that you got contact info, we'll reach out to you by chat, so that way you don't have to broadcast your information to everybody on this call tonight. All right, now we're moving on to Blund Creek.
Yes, so here we're at Blund Creek. Here's that boardwalk connection you mentioned earlier. So here's how you can get to the boardwalk, hike and bike trail. We will connect right there to that at Blund Creek. We also have another pedestrian hybrid beacon or a protected pedestrian and bicycle crossing located here that will help if you happen to be wanting to come to or from that boardwalk connection and get to the other side of the street here. And also bus stops conveniently located to access that.
And so those are moving from their current location from Alta Vista, right?
Which ones are moving? So the crossing is moving here from where it is currently today. I'll show you there in a minute. It is down here further along the corridor at Alameda. You can see the crosswalk in the existing location there, and that is being relocated over here to Blund Creek. And I'll explain why in just a second, why that has to move. So as we cross Blund Creek, we are on a bridge. It's actually 3 separate bridges, one for eastbound. You see the kind of orange boxes here, one for the eastbound lanes, one for the transit way, and then one for the westbound lanes. That is a longer bridge structure here. And we come across Blund Creek to Alameda. So I mentioned that this current pedestrian hybrid beacon crossing has to be relocated to the one I just showed over at Blund Creek. And the reason for that is that at this point, as soon as we come off the bridge from Blund Creek, the transit way starts to elevate on retaining walls, still in the middle of the street, but above the roadway lanes next to it. And the reason it does that is because if you're familiar with the area, this is on a very steep slope. The existing grade or existing slope of the roadway is too steep for light rail vehicles to be able to operate on. And in order to flatten that out, we can raise the transit way up and have it come up at a flatter slope than the roadway below it, next to it. But doing so creates retaining walls on either side of the transit way that you see in these red lines here. And that would prevent an at-grade crossing where it's currently located today to go across the street. So in this area between Alameda and Travis Heights Boulevard is where our transitway starts to come up above on those retaining walls up to a maximum height of 8 to 10 feet above the roadway lanes next to it. And then it levels out so that it's flat again with the roadway at the intersection so that everyone can cross flat surface here. And then we come into the Travis Heights Station. So you see the platform here. This one's different from the Waterfront Station in that it's a center platform. So there's only one platform and you can board the train going in either direction from that same platform.
You zoom into this intersection as well, because it looks like you've got some turn lanes, some U-turn lanes. There's a lot going on here. Yeah.
Yes. So I mentioned earlier the right in, right out access, meaning you can't turn left across the transitway in any direction except at intersections. So you have these left turn lanes here that allow for those U-turn movements to go back the other direction if needed, as well as, of course, turn left if you're going that way. In here to get to the platform, you would use the crosswalks at the intersection to come into the middle here and access the platform via these ramps. So at Waterfront Station, because we weren't crossing a roadway right next to the platform itself, we could actually lower the tracks a little bit there so that our platform was flat or the same surface level as the sidewalks. But everywhere else along the corridor, because we're crossing a roadway and that crossing has to be perfectly flush with our tracks, our platform is 14 inches higher than the roadway. And that's to provide a level boarding surface that's fully accessible onto our light rail trains. But that 14 inches means that we have to ramp down from that platform to get back to the street level. And you see those areas here.
And we're getting some requests from people who are biking. Can you just show the trip from here to Blund Creek to get to the boardwalk? Let's say somebody takes the train over here to get over I-35. They would get onto it. That's a sidewalk or shared use path?
Yes, so you would come off of the train onto this platform. You'll come across the intersection or across the westbound lanes of Riverside through this crosswalk. And then you would use what is shown in orange shaded area here as the shared use path, continuing along to Blund Creek to that boardwalk connection right here.
Okay, and again, you can see that new crosswalk there just west of Blund Creek.
That's right.
Which is a relocation from Alameda. But again, because of that, the bridge structure, it's easier to make that crossing at grade than to try to build something underneath or above.
That's right.
All right, so now we're back over at Travis Heights. We're headed towards the dog park.
Yes, this is an area where we had to leave the footprint of Riverside Drive in order to fit the station here. So stations have to be flat and straight. And the platform itself is 400 feet long, and you actually need a little area of tangent or straight track on either end of that for a total of roughly 500 feet. And to fit 500 feet of straight alignment through here did not fit within the existing footprint of East Riverside Drive, which is very curvy and kind of does this.
Yeah.
So in order to do that, we had to swing out of the existing footprint of East Riverside Drive and into Norwood Park. And that is what you see here as the footprint of impact into the dog park portion of Norwood Park.
Now, I know you're in there, but I mean, there'll still be a fence afterwards. It'll still be a functional dog park, right?
Yes, this would remain a dog park. We would just be sort of pushing it a little bit further north. So this is an impact of about 45 feet in here. And that's the portion that would be taken from the dog park of Norwood Park and transitioned into what would become what you see here as the footprint are the westbound lanes of East Riverside and then the transitway here and the shared use path maintaining on the outside. I'll explain in just a second why these are all in different colors. There's a reason for that, because those are actually part of a separate project. But before I get into I-35, wanted to talk a little bit more about Norwood Park here. And
yeah, that's a lot in the Norwood Park area that I'm familiar with. So it sounds like you know something I don't know.
Well, you see all these other lines here, those don't exist today. So we're showing what is a planned project by the Norwood Park Foundation that has been fully designed and anticipated to begin construction soon. And I think we have our city parks partners on the line with us if there are any questions about that project. But you'll see there the parking facilities and improvements to the Norwood House that are upcoming and planned. All right, so I-35, the reason that my color structure changes through here is because this portion of the project is actually by others or by TxDOT. Through here, I'm going to zoom out for a moment so you can see the big picture.
Lindsay, before we go fully to this section, can we just go back one? We're right here by Travis Heights. I saw a question about, people coming from I-35 wanting to make left-hand turns to get into Travis Heights.
Okay.
Can you show us where that is possible?
Yes.
I know Travis Heights Boulevard itself, but can we make other left-hand turns into the neighborhood?
Just at Travis Heights Boulevard. So if you're coming from I-35, you would be in these westbound lanes here, and you will come into this left turn lane here at Travis Heights Boulevard and turn into the neighborhood from right there.
And then there is another U-turn that we showed, and that's further east, right? That further west, correct? That was over by Tom's Market. There was the U-turn option over there.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so that would give you another way into the neighborhood to get over to Nooning. Nooning has a pedestrian crossing, but not a car U-turn there, right?
That's so if you aren't turning at Travis Heights Boulevard, let's say you want to come over here. Yeah. Into this area by Academy, which is the street that
you can't get to anyway at this point. It's been closed.
Yeah, it doesn't connect to Riverside anyway. But let's say you want to go somewhere over there. So you would come past Travis Heights. You would go to that area that I showed earlier by the Waterfront Station, where there's a light there today between the two TxDOT buildings, and that's where that U-turn would be to come back and then go east to access any of these areas.
Okay, so it's pretty similar to today. I just thought it was helpful to point out that U-turn is a benefit because at the moment it's not really a U-turn there. And then Travis Heights you can still get into and out of just like you do today. All right, so now you got like a crisscross spaghetti bowl situation here. You wanna?
So I'm gonna zoom out for a minute before I zoom in so everyone can figure out what we're looking at.
That isn't the light rail project, right? Like we're not doing this.
We are not doing this interchange. This is part of the Mobility 35 program, TxDOT's Capital Expressway or Mobility 35 Central segment. And this is what is called a SPUI or SPUI, which stands for Single Point Urban Interchange. And the reason for looking at this innovative intersection type is that although this would be built by TxDOT, it is being planned hand in glove with the light rail. And the light rail coming through the I-35 intersection, we looked at some earlier alternatives that had more of a traditional intersection. And it meant that the eastbound and westbound through movements weren't able to occur on the same signal phase as the trains. And it was causing a lot of backups and delays and congestion because they were needing their own signal phase due to a lot of the left turn movements that happen at the same time as those eastbound and westbounds. So what this does is let the trains move through the intersection at the same time as the through vehicular traffic. So the ones that aren't turning can go through at the same time as the trains. And so you don't have to keep blocking traffic every time a train comes through for those through movements. And then it isolates the left turn movements to these kind of sweeping areas that you see here. So coming northbound left going this way, coming southbound left would be this turn here, and kind of mirrored in the other direction.
I think I've seen intersections like this up by IKEA, and I've seen them down at Slaughter and Mopac. So it's not really new, it's just new in this area. Do we know, does this have to be completed before we build the light rail, or is this happening after at the same time?
It needs to occur before. So we're working closely with TxDOT on the phasing of the two projects so that this interchange can be built before we get to building this portion of the blue line, so that we can come in and put the rail into that bridge structure with the bridge already being there for us to cross over.
All right, thanks for that. So understanding timing.
Yes. So going through here, once we get to I-35, we come back inside the footprint of Riverside. So we're not swinging outside of it anymore. Going through the interchange to the east, we start to get over to Summit here on the east. I'll mention that this area, while we do consider it at grade, just the nature of the topography here is that one side of the roadway is quite a bit higher than the other side. And when you're driving down here, you might notice there's a big sloped median that goes right where our transitway is planned to be right here. And our transitway can't be on that kind of slope. So we need that to be flat. And so what you'll see here are this red line on the north side of our transitway is another retaining wall. And what we're doing is basically leveling the tracks out with the high side of the roadway or the eastbound lanes so that this would all be flat. And then you drop down to the other side of that wall and the westbound lanes are lowered below it.
I see.
And that's for a pretty short segment here where it then starts to level back out going across the roadway. And then we're to Summit. And again, you'll see here a U-turn lane that'll allow for access into and out of the areas between signalized intersections if going the other direction. So you see that in both directions.
And I mentioned like earlier a new driveway there for the breakers on the other side. Yeah, I was just wondering how they would be able to get out. So it looks like the breakers has that new driveway access point just east of that intersection, because I think that's the current one. But if you go just east of it, yeah, right there. So for those who live in that complex, you can head west and then turn on Summit to head east. That's an important discussion that's been happening with that property. So for anybody who's living there right now, we have been speaking to that property.
Yes. We're almost to the point, actually we are to the point where you'll start to see those bicycle and pedestrian elements separate along the border, where we had a little bit more room to work with.
So a lot of demand in the chat, Lindsay. So you're getting some fans with that.
So you'll start to see that going east. In this case, it's not that you only have one element here, it's that we're tying into an existing sidewalk. So there's no need to rebuild that where it exists today. So a sidewalk right here and a bike lane here. I'm going to scroll to some other places where you'll see, where we actually show those two elements both as new and side by side through that area. So right here we come up to the Lakeshore station. We're at the Lakeshore intersection here. Another center platform station where again you come into that from the intersection into the middle and come up to that platform level. And we have access at both sides to that station, on the east side from Parker and Shore District and on the west side from Lakeshore. And that gets us through this segment of the South Shore Working Group. So I think we have lots of time to answer questions.
Well, I'm excited about that. Thank you, Lindsay, for walking us through. And I assume we'll probably have to keep putting this back up. But I think there's a lot of people who are panelists. And to be fair, Many of them are actively working on the Q&A document right now. So I may be taking some of them by surprise. And for that, I do apologize. But if you're planning to be part of the Q&A, it would be helpful if you could turn on your cameras. In particular, let's see, we've got, I think we've got some questions. I'll start with Lindsay, some questions you can answer, but just beware, Lee Austin and Roberto Gonzalez, you might have some questions tonight. There's also some questions about like technical aspects, and you never know, Alvin, we might bug you as well. So just be on deck as we try to work through some of these questions. In addition, I'm going to go ahead and turn on the ability to raise hands. So if you are in the audience tonight and you would like to ask a question live, you can go ahead and raise your hand and we'll try to get to them in the order that your hands are raised. But please do me a favor. If we ask your question, you can put your hand down because we've asked your question. So just make our lives easier and make sure that we don't repeat. So first, let's talk about crossing the river. Can we go back to where we started? There were some questions here about, you're on a bridge. Why not stay on a bridge? Is there a reason why we're going right back to the surface and being in the street after already being on the bridge? Are there pros and cons? What was the thinking there? And Lindsay, are there other people who you would want to ask about this too?
Yeah, and I'll ask Sarah Hagee to jump in here as well, but who really helped lead us through the planning process and the selection of what we call the locally preferred alternative, which was the process of looking at, kind of all the options on the table and getting to that preferred alternative that advances forward and was adopted by the various Cap Metro board and city council at the time. And the general guidance of that is that we were street level wherever we could be street level. So if it didn't, if we had the right of way to fit that footprint there, and if it was operationally feasible, then we would have it street level where possible. Having an elevated guideway introduces significant cost, but it also introduces other impacts that you don't always think about, like visual. It really creates this kind of visual barrier in some locations. But Sarah, I'll ask if you have anything else to add to that.
No, Lindsay, I think you covered it. But during, generally, as you said, during our evaluation phase, during alternatives analysis, we really looked at the width of the right-of-way and the intensity of development, and there had to be enough constraints along a segment or a portion of the segment that would warrant elevating the right-of-way, largely because of that cost, either elevating or putting it below grade. So straying from the street level transit way, that decision was based on, one, trying to minimize costs wherever possible, and it really needing to be the right conditions to warrant either elevation or underground conditions.
And can I ask a follow-up? It's sort of related, and I'm not sure if you want to get Alvin involved as well, but it's really about this turn. This is a sharp turn. So why are we making a sharp turn? Have we considered other options? I know that this was a consideration in other parts of the system, trying to avoid sharp turns. So how are we making this work and why?
And I'll assume you mean a sharp turn by the transit way.
Yeah.
Why are we coming in here and it's a tight turning movement?
Yeah.
Sure. So there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that we do need, again, that roughly 500 feet of straight tangent track for the platform area itself. So that kind of lent itself to keeping the track straight coming off of the bridge rather than introducing another curve over here and turning. The other reason is you can probably imagine what would happen if that turn wasn't so tight. It would come all the way through these properties, and there would be additional property and structure impacts and displacements associated with a softer turn of sorts.
So this, would you say this is a less than ideal turn, or you know, a lot of work was done?
You know, it does reduce the operating speed substantially because of how tight that turn is. If I remember right, I think this one goes down to 10 miles an hour. But if you're going to do that, doing it coming into the station is the place to do that. You're going to be slowing down anyway, so it doesn't have really a material operations impact because it happens to be occurring right when you're coming to a stop regardless.
Well, thanks
and,
for
and
that.
Lonnie,
Oh,
Lonnie,
yeah,
yeah, it's
if you
not.
want to turn the camera, you know.
Yeah, yeah, it's not a real bad turn. I mean, it's not ideal, but I've seen them where they're 90 degrees, and this is a little bit greater than 90 degrees. So although it's not ideal, it's definitely not worst case scenario. So I think it works for the area that we have, and obviously we're close to a station. So in terms of speed, slowing down, and I think it's a good design for where we are right now.
We're well within the design criteria. We're not exceeding any criteria for this. We are within, well within the operating abilities of the trains with this turn.
Well, let's see. I wanted to ask a question for Austin, for Lee Austin from the City of Austin's Transportation Department. Lee, you may be typing furiously in the background, but I'm hoping you can join us. There you are. We had some questions about the mix of uses in this area. Events like this attract certain audiences, of course. And so we had questions like, why aren't we cutting car lanes in this area? And so I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about some of the decisions made in this area, and then why are we maintaining 2 car lanes in each direction in this section?
Well, we're not cutting car lanes, we're maintaining the existing car lanes. Riverside is one of our higher arterials in town. It carries about a little over 30,000 cars a day, which is comparable to maybe Cedar Chavez over there east of or west of Lamar. In addition, it seems very, very heavy peak traffic. So it didn't seem feasible to take the lanes down. We shared the concerns with the multimodal access. You know, we were the ones, the city advocated very hard to get the sidewalk on the south side because it's never been there and it's been a problem by the blocks and the cliffs. As well as we definitely wanted to see more on the north side, but we recognize the constraints that we have with the affordable housing and what's in place currently. Yeah, that said, that's always something that we can look at. You know, there are good points raised about as far as your constraints in the system are always your signals. And there aren't very many signals through here in the PHBs. So that will be one of the things that continues to be looked at. Like maybe there's less, maybe that winds up working out, maybe it doesn't. But what we're trying to do through here is maintaining the seat capacity, not reduce it, because we know we have incredible density coming up through the state's been tracking development and other developments up there. So losing capacity didn't seem like it was particularly feasible at this location, which is one of the few connections to 35 from South Central Austin. But we weren't adding to it, and we were trying to get as much multimodal as we could. And we recognize it's not ideal. I be honest, I commute this way to work every day, and I see the current sidewalk's not in great shape, but we're doing the best we can to get as much as we can.
I really appreciate the position you're in, Lee. I mean, even in this same Q&A, if you're looking at the Q&A tonight, folks, there were people asking to cut lanes, and there were people saying, but I need to make left-hand turns from my car. And so we're trying to balance a real mix in this corridor. So I appreciate the work that you've done to make every user get through this section. I wanted to go ahead and take a question from the audience. It looks like, Olivia, you've been very patient with your hand up. And if you unmute yourself, you can be live on the air.
Thanks so much, everybody. And I really appreciate everybody's time and effort on this. I've been living here on Riverside and Willow Creek Drive for 15 years, and 7 of them I was a bike commuter, and I've been hit on my bike 3 times in this area. Yeah. I also work at the Mexican American Cultural Center. So I am 100% your client because there's no current bus system that brings me to the MAC, even though it would be like a 5-minute bus ride. But anyway, I know we have limited time. So I just wanted to say that when I did research on this, I tried to understand how to increase safety with lighting, bike lights, pedestrian safety, and some other things in my neighborhood. I found that of the 10 most dangerous intersections in Austin, 5 of them were along Riverside in this area and along Burton and Old Wharf. And I really understand very deeply from, going this way every day, some of the major, issues, especially at Willow Creek Drive and Riverside. That intersection is a high crash area, as well as Pleasant Valley and Old Wharf, Pleasant Valley and Riverside. I'm wondering, with the increased traffic of this being the Riverside corridor, plus the domain on Riverside and all these developments, how we plan to deal with an already suffocating amount of traffic and a high incident of crashes.
Thanks for that, Olivia. I appreciate it very much, your question there. And it sounds like you're going from east of I-35 and heading over towards downtown. So, possibly the boardwalk is part of that trip, but also you mentioned the benefit of having the bridge connection across. But the question was really more about the safety in this area. And I guess, again, that's a, Lee Austin question. I'm not sure if there are other people you might recommend as well, because some of it is the transportation infrastructure, some of it is the fabric of the urban network that's there as well.
Yeah, and specifically those intersections that Olivia just mentioned are all east of 35, where the volume is 40,000. It's 10,000 more than what we see right here. And that's a 6-lane roadway at that section right there, east of 35 currently. Very high density apartment complexes, a lot of affordable housing. So you see a lot more pedestrians and vulnerable users than you might see in the city. So it definitely is a concern. And we actually have some Vision Zero safety projects.
Lee, hold on one second. Lindsay, are you able to zoom in a little bit on that eastern section? I'm not sure if you're able to go past where we did at Parker, but between Pleasant Valley and Parker, you might be able to zoom in on what's being planned.
It's all the intersections through here tend to be higher crash locations. So we have in the interim some Vision Zero safety improvements that we're in the middle of implementing, and then we will take those same safety procedures and apply them to the design that we have for Project Connect, because they definitely are ones where we see a lot of vulnerable users and we want to make sure it's safe for everybody. Mike, I don't know if you have something to add there as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to jump in and add something. I definitely understand where the question asker is coming from. I'm a daily bike commuter myself. I used to live at the intersection of Old Wharf and Burton, so understand how dangerous the area can be currently. But yeah, I think one thing to add here is that generally all of the improvements that were planned as part of the Riverside corridor project are incorporated into this Blue Line project. I mean, that's a very broad statement, but what we're looking at is basically the Riverside corridor project with all of those safety improvements with a rail running down the middle. So all of those improvements, from protected left turns to eliminating slip lanes to adding bike and ped facilities throughout, and kind of taking that outside lane, all of that stuff is included in this project as well.
Yeah, to the comments that we had earlier about travel lanes and balancing the modes, this was an area where we did the analysis and discovered or realized that we could lose a lane to give more space for the bikes and the peds. So here it worked pretty well. It's trickier once you get west of 35.
Yeah, I appreciate the points that you brought up. Just that it's really the complete street network. It's not just the transit improvement here. It's getting all modes through. So I hope that answers a little bit of your question, and hopefully gives you some excitement about the project plans that are coming your way. I also see Turner Kerr has a hand up. If you unmute, you should be live on the air.
All right, y'all hear me?
Yeah.
All right. First of all, thank y'all so much for what y'all do. ATP and the rest of the team and staff put a ton of effort and a ton of thought into making sure this is done right. Might be a softball, but what are you most excited about for this segment of the Blue Line, and what design elements do you feel provide the biggest impact or improvements over the existing conditions?
You know, before Lindsay, you try to take that alone. There are so many people working on the Blue Line. And so if you are on the call today, you know, I don't want to call names out, just if you want to turn on your camera and talk about what is exciting you on this project. I know you've been spending years working on the Blue Line. So this is your moment to talk about all the things that you're looking forward to.
I love this question. No one ever asks me what I love about the project, only about what the impacts are. So thank you. I would say, you know, in this area, the Waterfront Station is a great example of providing access that really takes into account existing and future uses of the area. So there's going to be a lot of density here. There's going to be a lot of movement, and we're really trying to make that as seamless as possible, and would provide access that is incredibly convenient from here, not only to the airport, but really in the other direction too. Now, are you going to ride from Waterfront to downtown? I don't know. I actually would hope you would walk and bike across the bridge. It's a beautiful opportunity and connection, but you could ride. But I think what's even more important than that is being able to connect all the way to the Orange Line, and you could go from here all the way to North Lamar Transit Center, because the Blue Line connects to the Orange Line at Republic Square. So just the options that it provides through here, and how this station area is really going to be connected to all of the various uses in this area. But I'll let others answer.
You know, I'm helping other people get their cameras on, because I think certainly Jocelyn, maybe Alvin or Roberto might have thoughts as well. But you brought up a point sort of related tangentially, but you know, people sometimes ask about, you know, what is the benefit of having a station in this area? And you kind of hit on it, that, you know, somebody who's in Travis Heights has just as much of an interest in going to the airport or going to UT or meeting somebody for dinner at Crestview Station. And now that doesn't always have to be a car trip. I mean, that's exciting, just on the face of it, that there are new ways to get around town, maybe have a drink or two and not have to worry about how am I getting to and from that gathering. So that's what excites me about this section. Jocelyn, you have something to add?
Yeah, I mean, it's along the same line as far as I used to, when I first moved here 21 years ago, and I lived off of Parker Lane in Oldthorpe, and I felt very stranded every time I tried to. I didn't have a car. I relied on Cap Metro bus service, and I felt stranded, and I think that's still maybe true for a lot of people in the area today. And so to provide access in this area, so that people can get across I-35 safely, you can you know, just get around. And we're only talking about the light rail tonight, but we're also expanding our, you know, Metro Rapid lines in the area. It's really exciting stuff. What I most appreciate is that really the relationship building that has come with our outreach efforts. There are a lot of places that we've already highlighted on the lines, and some that are coming, that we really have just been super intentional about reaching out to community groups, hearing people's concerns, and then working with the technical team. I don't know if y'all know, but right now behind the scenes, there are 19 people working on answering all of your questions. And it's just this team that has coming together, not just from community, but the technical side, to really make this work for Austin. So thanks for asking that question.
And I did want to give Roberto Gonzalez a chance to chime in as well. He's, I'm not sure, you're the director of planning nowadays, right?
Yeah, thanks, Lonnie. My name is Roberto Gonzalez. I'm the director of service planning for Metro. And I've been with Metro for 27 years, so I've seen a lot of changes. I think I'm most excited about the fact that this is a natural evolution and something that we've been wanting to see for some time and prepare for. The team has done a really nice job of trying to make sure that they include and incorporate how the other modes are going to be running either alongside, complementing, supporting, and being enhanced. Bikes, we heard about bikes right now, pedestrian, improving pedestrian connectivity and safety. Our buses will continue to provide a network of services in and around this whole area. We're still going to run parallel to some of these corridors in here. We're going to be feeding into this area. And if you were part of our discussions just a few weeks ago, you'll know that the Trinity Bridge, the bridge crossing Lady Bird Lake, is now being looked at to incorporate a separate bridge for transit to cross in that area. So that'll make someone like Olivia, who talked a little bit earlier, give her an opportunity to either use train or bus and get off near the Cesar Chavez area and to be able to just walk or bike over to the MAC, that area. It'll speed up some of our services in many points because we'll have another opportunity to cross over into the downtown area. Just a number of good things that I see from the transit perspective, offering, like you said, Lonnie, different modes and choices for our community to get to and from a number of destinations. So those are some of the things that we're looking forward to from our end.
Well, thanks for that. And I do, for those who are watching, it may be a softball question, but there are a lot of people in the background who've been working a ton. And so thank you for asking that. We rarely get a chance to talk about that. I will say there are several more questions here that are more technical in nature, and I want to bring those up. I think we can answer those pretty easily, Lindsay, and encourage people who want to ask questions. You can still raise your hand. We've got about 15 minutes left on the broadcast today. So the first one is a question about heritage oaks on the north side of the Travis Heights station. And they were wondering if they'll be preserved or will they be impacted? And let's talk about generally our tree strategy here.
Yes, there are tree impacts to protected and heritage trees along the corridor and in the area that you've noted here. In addition to the north side through here, there's actually, you can see it right there, one right in the middle of our Travis Heights station that can't be avoided. So there are impacts. That is part of the environmental analysis that we are working on and will be documented in the environmental impact statement that was mentioned earlier that will be published this summer. In addition to identifying the impacts, there is a process in terms of what is the mitigation for those impacts. So we will be following the city's tree ordinance, which means identifying ultimately all of the impacts to trees 8 inches and larger, and following that ordinance in terms of proper procedures of mitigating those. In some cases, it's relocating them where they are variable to be relocated and can be preserved wherever possible. And in some cases, it is replacing them and various other options.
Well, let's see, I think this next question you may be able to address, but I think Mike Schofield might be helpful as well. Just because Mike, I think you've been working most closely with TxDOT on the SPUI. And there was a question that came up about just wanting to track the shared use paths or the bikeways and stuff that are crossing over Riverside. Can we slide over to that section and just maybe zoom in to see what the bike ped connections across this look like?
And before I hand it over to Mike, I want to go backward for just 10 seconds on the trees. I should have mentioned that in addition to mitigation, we also avoid the impacts wherever we can. And there's lots of places where along the corridor, you'll see, say a bike path or a sidewalk snake around a tree because we're trying to avoid that impact if possible without displacing someone or creating some other ripple effect of impact. I would be remiss if I didn't note that. So Mike.
Yeah, and I want to give a disclaimer before Mike jumps in and just reiterate again, this bridge here, this is I-35 project, that's TxDOT. And Mike's going to help us read the tea leaves here, but just to be clear, this is not Project Connect. It says Project Connect goes over this bridge, and we're dealing with the reality of what is on the road at that point.
Yeah, thanks. I was just typing responses to this question in the Q&A document because we're getting a lot of the very similar questions, which is how are bikes and pedestrians going to get across this intersection? And yeah, like you said, Lonnie, this is a TxDOT project that has been through more iterations than I could even think of in the past decade in terms of different options for what this intersection and what the whole I-35 corridor could look like. And the city has been coordinating with TxDOT throughout that time and will continue to coordinate on making sure we get to a good kind of safe outcome for how all modes will get through here. This option, I think we've seen through modeling, is probably the only option we've seen proposed that can get the rail through without significant delay to all modes, this SPUI option. So really at this point, one of our the things we'll be working with TxDOT on is how the pedestrians safely get through here. And you can see we don't have different colors here. It's all kind of orange, but Lindsay is putting her cursor over the shared use paths. And so they're planning shared use paths in both directions on both sides of the streets. So on both the east and west side of I-35 and the north and south side of Riverside would have shared use paths. There are under crossings, so there would be grade separation in the north and south direction that are kind of those dashed lines on the sides. Those are a little hard to see. Can you hover over those, Lindsay? It's kind of a dashed line going under the entire interchange.
Yeah, it's a little...
That's okay. It's kind of under where that signal is. All that to say, there's many options for how to get pedestrians safely through an intersection. They're looking at grade separation, so you don't have to be at the road level at all. They're looking at potential signalization across slip lanes, or raised crossings, or other options for how to get safely across a slip lane, or otherwise the crossings would be signalized. But a lot of that is all still under design, and we'll keep working with TxDOT to make sure that we come to a safe solution for each of these crossings.
Thanks for walking us through that, Mike. It's kind of hard to read in places, so that was helpful. I see Felicity Maxwell, that you've got your hand up, and if you unmute yourself, you can be live on the air.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I just want to first of all reiterate, thanks so much for going to all this detail. I think the one thing that is outstanding, but I'd like, speaking of tea leaves reading, is to understand how the first Lakeshore station would be connected to Lady Bird, and also all of the bridge connections. And I know you all still have that all in design, but obviously that's a key point of understanding sort of how that would all work together potentially, because it seems like there's no lines there. So, and specifically for pedestrian and bike access, as that was obviously discussed a little bit in the bridge meeting that you all had, was how that was going to be emphasized. So sort of understanding, even if it's not finalized, how those two might work together.
Sure. So here at the Waterfront Station, I mentioned we're coming off of the bridge. The bridge itself has not been designed and is anticipated to undergo its own design process to look at the various modes crossing the river there, in addition to the light rail, and including the pedestrian and bicycle. But I'll talk about it a little bit from a high level. So there's actually multiple connection points that should be made for pedestrians and bicyclists coming off of the bridge and coming straight into the station. If you happen to want to be able to access the light rail is one, and that could, follow, basically parallel or follow the light rail. But another is to the hike and bike trail, which is actually quite a bit lower. So there, this drops down in a embankment here, and the trail is much lower down here. So looking at ways, and I don't have any of those pretty graphics, I would love to encourage you to go to that Lady Bird Lake Bridge meeting, because there are some really great illustrations of what I'm not doing the best job of describing without those pretty pictures, but you can also come off of the bridge to connect down to the trail and follow along to connect into the station. And then I noted that there were several questions about what does all this development planned in here mean for that as well. And there is a traffic impact analysis study underway to determine what is needed for access in this corridor for the vehicular or traffic capacity. And that will help inform how to make these sidewalk and bikeway connections too. So there's a lot of pieces that have to come together right here that haven't come together yet and will be part of the next stage of design. But it's really a kind of from all angles connection that has to be made here. It's not like some of the traditional stations where your station's in the middle of the roadway and you access it from 2 points. You're kind of accessing it from 360 degrees here.
Let's see, I'm following a lot of the questions here on the side, and it looks like several of them have already been answered. There were several questions about power lines in this area, whether they'll be overhead, whether they'll be buried, whether having TPSSs means no overhead power. You know, there's a lot of like related questions about power. And so, Lindsay, you may be able to answer it, but there may be some other people that you would want to draw in on this question.
Sure. So I can start with the overhead power lines. There's overhead distribution lines for electric through here, and generally those would remain. Some of the poles might need to be relocated where there is a conflict associated with our blue line improvements that would push our infrastructure to be where one of those poles is, and we might have to shift it or move it a little bit, but we're not looking at removing those overhead lines and poles except where they conflict and we cannot put those poles anywhere. So one example of that is actually right here. There is a portion where we're looking at burying those overhead lines coming through here because we have zero room to work with to move those poles without, again, displacing these residences.
Interesting.
But otherwise, we generally have space for them. And if it isn't a conflict of the project, then it doesn't become a part of the project from a utility perspective. And then the questions about traction power and how that relates to the overhead wires for the light rail, the traction power is actually what feeds the power ultimately up to those wires. So those two things go hand in hand. So if you are operating off wire in a segment, you don't need either the traction power or the overhead wires if you're able to operate on, say, battery power or an alternate power source.
Well, thanks for clarifying all of that. We're getting towards the top of the hour. And I want to thank everybody for your participation tonight. And again, we have an entire area to store all of these meeting comments, questions, the slide decks, the videos, even of this broadcast tonight. They live on the Project Connect website. And at the top of the Project Connect website, there's a giant button that says Public Engagement Library. And you can click in there and look at all of the past meetings, including this one at that site. In the meantime, though, I think, Diane, you might have a slide about the upcoming meetings. And I wanted to make sure that those who are here tonight have an opportunity to participate in upcoming meetings. So, Lindsay, thank you so much for walking us through some tough questions here. And also thank you to the audience for bringing these questions to light, because I can guarantee that we wind up debriefing about every question that we get and kick the tires on whether the team should be considering changes based on your feedback. So thank you for being so involved. I don't know, Jocelyn, are you gonna take it away on the Stay Engaged slides tonight?
Sure, yep. Yeah, so I am your public, and once again, for those of you who may have missed it in the beginning, my name is Jocelyn Vokes, and I'm the Public Involvement Manager for the Blue Line. So I would be so happy to meet with you all individually, but in the meantime, we'd like to continue to invite you to stay involved with our community meetings. And the next one is a very exciting one. On June 1st, we're going to be studying vehicles and systems. And so what are these light rail lines going to look like? The cars, the systems, including, we had a sneak peek of the TPSSs, the substations. And so we are going to look at that as a group for the first time. We'd like to get your feedback on that. Then on Wednesday, June 8th, we're going to have an update on the combined maintenance facility. We're going to be talking about the proposed site that we have selected. And then on the June 14th, we'll be talking about the drag so we'll be working with the orange line on that. And then on June 22nd, it's another exciting meeting there too, where we're going to look at the subway overview and stations in the Austin Underground. As always, we'd love to have your feedback at feedback@kepmetro.org. If you're into snail mail, our physical address, mailing address is there as well. As always, our materials are available in English and Spanish. And if you know of someone who needs a different language provided for, please reach out to us. We're happy to have our interpreters. Zoom, thankfully, has the capability to accommodate more than one language interpretation room. So reach out to us for anything we can help with. And
well, thanks again, everybody, for your participation tonight. I look forward to seeing you at these events and more. And in the meantime, I hope to see you out on Cap Metro.